In the last podcast, where I was trying to rescue sociology from its strange internal problem, which seems to be reducing it to nonsense, and suffering from the same type of problem that philosophy has suffered from for the best part of a century, Wittgenstein onwards. It's amazing that name is unknown to most people, and yet he, thanks to Russell, who elevated him to academic respectability, he's changed the history of this country radically. It's very hard to explain now without getting extremely dull, the influence of that individual. Interesting too to note, which I think it did in a couple of podcasts before, the one about our day, that Cambridge has form. Russell elevated Wittgenstein to a position akin to an academic god of knowledge. I can think of nothing more ironic. Despite the fact he had no academic qualification of significance. And he never had a degree. And that has a strange parallel with our day. Although my impression is that our day was a nicer man, is a nicer man. He's a chancer. But chancers are spread evenly across all of humanity. There's nothing special. The only odd thing about this situation is a small group of overwhelmingly white people decided that somehow colour of skin confers a certain form of saintly goodness, exceptionalism in extreme, and elementally racist. Very ugly, actually, when you look at the implications. However, that's another story. In the bit about sociology, I mentioned en passant the title of this podcast, which is a bit punchy. But I think it's worth making it very plain. It's a hobby horse of mine, and most people with the patience to read a few things which I gas on about will know exactly where I'm coming from. But I think it's worth making it very plain rather than embedding it in the usual moans and groans and criticisms I make, covering all sorts of things, and just focus on this particular aspect and blind spots which are causing so much grief, although most people don't even realise that is the problem. They look at symptoms most of the time. I'm looking at the cause of today's current, you might call it mental upset, almost dis-ease in the intelligentsia. I don't like the metaphor, quite frankly, but it's hard really to explain it all in a shorthand way, give people an impression of what we're up against. Anyway, the title of this one is Knowledge is Not Power. Anyone who disagrees is a blockhead. Well, there you go. Now, this came to me because I met an old friend who I hadn't seen for 48 years. And we had lunch, excuse the cat. He's 21, he's a bit noisy now. 48 years. And he appeared out of the blue, largely thanks to his other half, who almost pushed him to seeing me again. We were both awkward. After all, the chance of disappointment when the person you're meeting you last knew when you were aged 21 or 22, and I'm 71 now, is very high because we change. I think it's less dangerous by way of possible disappointment after about the age of 20, 21, 22, because characters have largely formed by then. But certainly it gets more dangerous for younger. So if you meet somebody new at kindergarten, I think they call it primary school nowadays, I may have that wrong, you can change radically, almost elementally. I mean, there are traces of character which you most likely have at birth, which remain pretty well the same. But with greater knowledge and possibly, I don't know what bruises and bumps of experience, people do change. And so, what someone who might have been a bosom buddy at the age of 10 or 11 can become rather an irritating stranger when you meet them again 40 years later. Anyway, this fellow I knew at university, and he was one of the few who had the nerve, or maybe just a mind of his own, that he actually talked to me. In the late 70s, Manchester University was highly conformist. Students knew that. If you wanted to go to parties and such like, you had to toe the line. Anyway, on to the subject. Oh, yeah, the reason why I mentioned this old friend was because we were talking about this and that, and he came up with the classic trope, really, I suppose. Knowledge is power. Well, I don't like calling people blockheads, but I explained to him quite swiftly, and he got it in about 3 or 4 sentences, because he didn't have these sort of cultural blinkers that people have to very simple observations which go against what is the culturally accepted approach or attitude. In this country, it goes back to Francis Bacon, could go back a lot further, and it was convenient for the likes of him because he had authority, so he assumed it when he said knowledge is power. Knowledge is only power or information. There is a difference, because knowledge is information that can be appreciated consciously or potentially consciously, whereas not all information is like that. For instance, the information in terms of digital impulses necessary to form the image which you're seeing now, if you just showed the digital impulses, that wouldn't produce an image. You need a device to convert them into what you're seeing now. So, not all information is knowledge. And yeah, I think all knowledge is information, but I'm not certain about that. Anyway, knowledge is power. Well, yes. Now, the reason why, and I'll give you one illustration, I'll give you hundreds if I wanted to. When I was much younger, there was a disaster in India in a place called Bhopal, Union Carbide plant. They were making some pretty nasty stuff, and it hadn't been maintained properly. Now, people at the local level knew this. They knew they were sitting on effectively a time bomb. And the management in the United States either didn't want to know or ignorant. They wanted to squeeze maximum profit out of that plant, and it was going very nicely, thank you very much. Until one day it blew. Thousands were killed in the local area. Thousands. Now, the point of this is that the supervisors knew it. They knew that, it was a matter of time. People tried to get the information across to the decision makers who could give the green light for major capital expenditure to bring the plant up to scratch. But information didn't get through, either because they were deliberately deaf, or more likely it's because various other factors like, shareholder interests and all that sort of thing got in the way. Thousands were killed. Now the question is, the supervisors had the information, but they were completely impotent. So how come, if you believe knowledge is power, where does impotence come from? If you look at it another way, if you think knowledge and power are interchangeable, because after all, knowledge is power, that means power is knowledge, then one or the other words is redundant. We'll get rid of the word power, Well, it's going to be quite hard talking about life, the universe and everything without having some little chat about power. Now, in the previous podcast about sociology, I was moaning or complaining. I don't like going like this, but it's so frustrating about the popular belief that influence is power. So then, on that basis, because we all know society has massive influence, you can then follow that through and to suggest that an abstraction society can have agency and consciousness. So when people say, by way of excuse, oh, society caused me to become a bank robber or something, so I'm really innocent. It's just that the world's been very tough on me. My lord, speaking to the judge, I'm little more than a thoughtless creature that is entirely motivated, controlled by what experiences I have. I think it's very odd, because that reduces the human spirit to nothing. Of course, that is a denial of personal responsibility. It's denial of personal authority. Each individual has a very limited, they do have authority. So I have the authority to, I don't know what, just pick this up if I wanted to. No. There's no rule that says I can't. There's no policeman in the corner saying, you can't do that. Although currently in the UK we're getting a situation where if you wrong speak, it's increasingly dangerous. We have a justice system that seems to believe that it should treat spoken word as dangerous, if not more dangerous, than physical assault. I think they believe that because words can travel very quickly. So one idea can multiply, or duplicate and triplicate and so on and so forth very, very swiftly. 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. You start getting a very big number. Whereas a punch in the nose doesn't replicate at such speed. Yeah, you can. Some could go get very angry and get their chums to come around and beat you up and so on and so forth. But, it's fairly slow. With the modern internet, this replication terrifies the authorities because they like to control information. Now, the reason why they like to control information is admission of the truth that knowledge is not power, because you need authority in that mix. The Bhopal supervisors and junior and general managers, what have you, had the knowledge, but they did not have the authority to okay massive capital expenditure to bring that plant up to scratch, and therefore effectively save the lives, literally, of thousands of people. So when someone says knowledge is power, they're displaying a lazy sort of ignorance. It's not intentional, it's actually deeply cultural. And the problem is that very often cultural influence can prevent people from listening or from grasping very, very simple truths. So the proper expression should be, and it's a bit vague because there's so many factors, so I can't present you an equals formula, but I can suggest something which is closer to the truth, and that is authority and information, stroke knowledge, I know the difference. Authority and knowledge combine and metamorphose into political and social power. If you want to understand politics, politics is very much about that expression. You need to grasp information flows. You also need to understand where the authority is coming from, who has the authority and who doesn't. Now, this is not necessarily formal authority, which has been given by, I don't know, politicians moved into a Minister of Health or something. So this new Minister of Health thinks they have authority, and then they start trying to pull levers, and nothing happens. It's because the information flow and the political muscle is largely controlled by the civil service, because they've been now, most of them, for decades. So they know about the internal information landscape in terms of relationships. It's the quality of relationship that determines status amongst people. I say the relationships. You can establish this by a very simple device. This is not, this just illustrates the importance of the point. The actual device can be very useful in limited ways, and I've used it once or twice, and it can be quite startling. And it's like this. You give numbers to authority status. So let us say you have a number of, I don't know, 1 to 100. The CEO would be authority status, shall we say 100, or pretty high up. And then you go down the authority chart. This is the official authority chart, down to someone, well, like I used to do. I used to do administrative work for fuel receipts and tachograph charts. They were sort of round bits of paper we used to have to indicate how long lorry drivers drove for bits and pieces, how long it took a rest, and so on and so forth. It's all electronic now, and a good thing too, because quite frankly, the job was soul destroying. And so you get the authority status. You just look at it. I mean, in a way, you can look at a plan of organisation, just take the lines off it, but you can tell by the levels, by and large, the level of authority. There are exceptions, like the PA, the MD reports straight in. Well, obviously, the PA doesn't have the authority of a general manager, several levels below, or 2 or 3. So there are exceptions. But by and large, though, the authority chart gives you an idea. They call it org plan, or plan of organisation. Call it what you like. The Japanese have a different system. Certainly they did in my time, which involved something that looked more like a solar system. That's very interesting. And I got on to sort of maybe understand the significance of the Japanese system of information flow and information discipline, which is lacking in our Western system, certainly in the British one, and I think in the American one. The Japanese system has its weaknesses, which arise from its strength, which is rather perverse. Anyway, so we have levels of authority, and we're given numbers to each level, 50, 40, 30, whatever you want to call it. You could do it might be easier to 1 to 10, depending upon how large the organisation is and how many levels of authority. And ideally, there should be as few as is practical. And then on the other side, you have this relationship or status. Now, status needs a number. I'll tell you why in a minute. But you can establish the status by simply, ideally getting 3 people, but you can do just by yourself because it gives you an idea. And you get the org plan, or whatever you want to call it, take the lines off it, so the people are now floating in space. And then you connect them together with lines by how much you judge they rate each other. This isn't the bulk of information going through. It's to do, and not even strictly speaking, the sum total of the value of information going through. I'll give you an example. In a large city office, going back many years, a trainee came in. It was a big financial company, and he'd just come from university, and he'd lucky on the milk round. He got this rather plum job as a trainee. And the doorman was particularly nice to him. He used to always look after the doorman, or woman, I suppose, I'm sorry, because what they don't know ain't worth knowing. They spend all day at the door, and they see people, and they get to judge their emotions and how to handle them. You've got to. People who think they rule the world can get pretty stroppy if they're in a bad mood. Often it's not because they're nasty people, it's simply because things have got to them. And they're in a very invidious position anyway, because you're sort of demigod, but on the other hand, you're a human being, and if you feel ill, you feel ill. It's a great leveller. And so you've got to get into office and pretend that you're sort of some kind of, immortal. You don't want people to see you weak. Weakness is strength is one of the big lies. A doorman, they got on well, and for several years they just nodded at each other as they went through. The doorman had been initially very kind to this individual. Because very often trainees coming in are the lowest of the low, and they're sort of almost like dirt beneath the shoes of the gods. Anyway, as luck would have it, 25 years later, this one-time nervous trainee was right at the top of the business. And one Saturday, the doorman noticed the FD, financial director, coming to the office on Saturday morning, which was not his wont. And about half an hour later, leaving, looking flustered with a bunch of papers under his arm. Now, it didn't happen there. Normally you put them in some of these ghastly document boxes or something. They're the sort of things that rather low-ranking business consultants carry around, following the big boss, who happens to be carrying little more than a piece of paper or an umbrella or something. Really nothing at all, really, because they're the gophers. Anyway, the FD was leaving with all this funny stuff, and the doorman sort of sensed that something was wrong. So he, come Monday, he made a phone call to the PA of the MD, who he equally there had quite a good relationship, because it was his habit to develop these relationships. And good practice too. And said, look, I've seen this, so it worries me a bit. He didn't even mention the MD's name. She, of course, did mention it to the MD. Anyway, long story short, it turned out the FD was involved in major fraud. There goes the cat again, I'm afraid. So, anyway, the point is you build this relationship, you put numbers on the lines. So the number value, shall we say it's 1 to 10, the number value between the doorman and the MD was 9 or 10, because they rated each other highly, despite the fact they very, very rarely said much, apart from a nod and, good morning, sir, this sort of stuff, Hello, George, that's all it was. So now you have sort of squibbly lines all over the place, and then you add up the value of each line going to each individual, and you get a status hierarchy. Now, to satisfy the authority and information, or should say knowledge maybe, metamorphose and combine to create power, in a large company, or in any business really, the status of an individual, and you've got a numerical number now, should match the authority status. To the extent that they don't, you indicate how relatively impotent someone is, or hasn't reached the necessary power to justify their level of authority. Now, in a big company, the greater the deviation, some deviation, between all the employees, the worse state the business is in, because it's not generating the power that it could have. Essentially, if it goes down to 0, the company's dead. A company cannot exist except in name on paper, unless it has the agency which requires the power to get things done. So the relationship between authority and knowledge is absolutely essential. Now, if you're sort of blind to this and you go around saying knowledge is power, you haven't really started to understand how corporate power is generated and how, in effect, what is the the blood and nervous system of a corporate entity. It's startling the level of ignorance caused by this one simple intellectual hang-up. And really intelligent. I mean, I'm not particularly intelligent. My strength is left field thinking, as you know. I can stick things together that most people are culturally capable of doing, or just, yeah. Really intelligent, highly educated, highly experienced people. They're often intuitively nervous, but they don't frame it methodically. Now, originally, I stumbled on this sort of little chart thing of information status, you might call it, and authority, because I was a desperately bad employee and got booted out of various businesses, rightly or wrongly. It was a bad time in the late 70s, early 80s. Management was a god-awful mess. And things like meat in the sandwich with trade unions and management and the wretched little middle managers in between, and junior managers used as sacrificial lambs for the sake of political status of either the shop steward or whoever, were essential to keep businesses going. Gross, but it happened. I can't blame any individual. Well, I don't know. There's a couple I've dealt with later on, but apart from them, by and large, people were hostage to politics of the time. We're getting it again now. The difference was in the 70s it was trade union barons versus government. We're now getting it in the form of civil service versus, I suppose, the government trying to run it. And it's rather like, someone rescues a small animal, maybe a lovely-looking, slightly large, fluffy kitten, and they keep it too long. It turns out to be a tiger or a lion or something, and your little pet suddenly becomes your little terror. Worse, it can even consume you. And in a way, this is what the situation the country is facing now. One of the interesting things I found with my very brief experience with trade unions, and I certainly was no great handler of trade unions or what have you. I hate the word, but but that was some expression to "can you handle the shop steward?" This is the sort of language was used. Is that a trade union had pretty good information flow structure. Now the reason why is because a lot of middle management, to protect their skins, because they were faced with trade unions who were very powerful and could destroy them individually if they really put their mind to it. They had to find some way of scapegoating junior managers or supervisors to save their own bacon. Pretty brutal. It's the way it was in the late 70s, early 80s. And it's the way it's developing again in today. And so they used a thing called information stranglehold. Now remember this expression. Authority and knowledge combine and metamorphose into social and political power. So these sort of junior, maybe senior managers, used a device called information stranglehold. This was to disempower their superiors and to prevent their juniors from blowing the whistle. One of the odd things is, but this sort of reinforces the reality of how things work, is for some strange reason, in British business, I think it still applies, it's considered deeply offensive to go round the back of your superior to blow the whistle. Oh, that's a crime. Which is odd, because if it's true, what's happening is the truth is being blocked from senior management. So the senior management is effectively being disempowered by the deliberate threat used by middle managers to make certain people keep their mouths shut about the truth. So the companies, in effect, being the power it's rather like putting leeches on. Their attitude's been weakened by this. When Washington's death was, I think, advanced, because when he was very unwell, they just applied more leeches, which was a desperate mistake. A lot of blood loss. Not really the thing you need when you're on your last legs. And the death of companies is associated by rampant and uncontrolled internal politics. And internal politics is very much about the relationship between authority and knowledge. So you see where this is going. Because if you have that blind spot and you just say, oh, knowledge is power, you don't focus on what's really going on. Consequently, excuse me. Consequently, you get the situation where it is taboo to talk about internal politics in business. I think in politics with capital P, people do talk a bit more about party politics, which is a form of internal politics in organisations there. And the similar rules apply. If a party's internal politics doesn't handle information flow properly, the party's in deep trouble. Because if you don't know, or you don't have the supply of information to take decisions backed on evidence and fact, you are almost, except luck intervening, you might take a decision, pure luck to take the right decision, you are liable to suffer from the impotence of unintended consequences. In other words, you think it's a very clever thing to, for the sake of Admiral Burnham, he thinks it's a clever thing to move large numbers of new arrivals, many who can't speak any English, and many who don't want to speak any English because they consider our culture harem or just dirty. That's a bit unfair because there's many religions coming across on these, not just one, but into leafy, expensive areas. Now, on the face of it, he might be thinking that's very fair, because why should the poor people take the load? I mean, ignoring the fact that stopping them is the real issue from coming in large numbers. So you think this is perfectly fair. Let the people in Tunbridge Wells have a few thousand in there, what have you. Behind it, there's a suspicion. He's thinking we better stick it to them a bit. But that's not the point I'm trying to say. But what he doesn't realise is he's angering rich people who before were sort of, in many cases, bien pensant bourgeois liberals. And they're going to suddenly realise that that nice, warm and cosy feeling about sort of a kumbaya view of the world, and being nice and so on and so forth, it doesn't work. The world's not a just place. And in the end, you've got to pay for it. And suddenly they'll start realising what they've been dishing out to those little people in, wherever it is, Newcastle or, Stoke-on-Trent or somewhere. He's not so nice. And our political opinions will change. So Burnham's going to lose either way. But I think he's going to lose much quicker and attract more ferocious kickback, whatever you call it, from the wealthy, because they've got a voice, whereas poor people in Stoke-on-Trent don't have a voice. And certainly in places like Rotherham and elsewhere, the children of poor people, as far as people in the leafy suburbs of houses at £1 million a pop and more, They don't care twopence in many cases. Some do, to be fair, but a lot of them, no, they don't. Because they consider them, those poor people, as beneath caste. Caste is the curse of British society. English society particularly, less so Celtic nations. They have their own issues, different issues, which arguably are equally unpleasant. Caste is a particular Saxon hang-up, and it's still with us, most certainly. Much more elemental than class. And so, yeah, they have for long, the wealthy in these suburbs, not all of them by any means, but certainly a fair number, considered that those beneath caste, the sort of English equivalent of untouchables, don't matter. They're morally inferior. Whatever happens to them, not that important. It is the ugly truth, which people won't tell you by and large, because, again, it's another example of a social blinker. I can tell you, even only as a tourist, for 2 years I was there. A sort of, it's a little George Orwell, you might call me. I'm not trying to compare myself with them anywhere near that giant. But I was a tourist, because you could never join another caste. Arguably, never leave one. I've done my best, but, I've gone so far as to turn myself into an almost out of society individual. You can never leave society, of course, but certainly on the margins in many ways. My caste consider me dangerous, a cause of disruption. And if I go elsewhere, they'll look at me and they may tolerate me, another caste, but they're going to think he's one of them. And they'll be right. Anyway, if we invite this strange person into our world, what's to stop him from disappearing again after, I don't know what, a year or two's worth of tourism? No, they don't want to know. And why should they? So, when I say knowledge is not power, anyone who disagrees is a blockhead. If it weren't for cultural blinkers, yeah, I should think that stupid. Because it's blindingly obvious that knowledge is not power. Yes, knowledge is needed to avoid the impotence of unintended consequences when you take decisions. There's no doubt about that. But it's not power. Power is a construct. It arises from many factors, not just informational authority and knowledge. You also need to be sufficiently healthy. You need to be mentally able to make judgments, understand and listen. You need to be able to have a certain amount of stability, will to do things. That means emotional investment. The will to reason, for instance, demands that you have to have the emotion to drive reason. That's from the first paradox. And then you go through the other paradoxes too. The second one, you have to accept when you're that whenever you're sensing things and all the information coming and so on and so forth, that it's impossible to apply the tests of logic to everything. So you have to accept in your unconscious memory there's a vast amount of stuff. Dangerous, stupid ideas, good ideas, wisdom next door to, borderline lunacy. It's all in the head, not tested or examined by logic. And then you do test a few things with logic because it's necessary for everyday life. But the rest of the stuff is in there just sitting around, a bit like a UXB in a way, or waiting for propagandists to suggest to you inappropriate connections between stuff that you haven't really thought about before but's inside your head, and suddenly you come to a conclusion. Oh yeah, Someone just told me that a lot of rich people are of Jewish ancestry. That's odd. Wonder why. Ah, yes, because you just told me that they're cheats and thieves, and they only want to. Oh, interesting. Yeah. Yeah, so jobs together. And then, oh yes, so therefore, everything that's going wrong with capitalism is a Jewish conspiracy. Hurrah! Yeah, it is. Propaganda gets in there like that. Strangely though, propaganda is not really successful with uneducated people with strong characters, particularly strong characters, because the natural intuitive distrust of long words, heavily loaded words, necessary to the cat's making noise again, I'm sorry, necessary to control people. It's the highly educated and intelligent who are the main targets of successful propaganda. And now the very people who think, oh no, they're far too clever to be conned by propaganda. It's a stupid, ignorant. They say things stupid because they can't get their mind around the fact you can be intelligent and ignorant. But you can if you've not had the luck to have nice education. Oh yes, there are a lot of intelligent, poor people around. But yeah, no, that's just too difficult for them to believe. So, coming back to again the original thing, the expression that you need to use is authority combined with knowledge permits or is necessary for the exercise of political and social power. And the thing you need to forget is the really sort of almost schoolboy girl observation. Oh, knowledge is power. It isn't. And once you understand if you really understand the business about the metamorphic creation of power, if you persist in saying knowledge is power, you are a blockhead. And that's being kind. You're possessed of, as with the ideologues, monumental artificial stupidity. I mean, AI doesn't have consciousness, so it can't be stupid or intelligent, even though it's called artificial intelligence. It can't handle incoherent or contradictory or partly formed entities that do exist in the intersubjective. And it certainly has no ability which is necessary for consciousness, to be able to reason. Because reason requires at least a temporary suspension of law of non-contradiction. You have to give meaning to contradiction to understand logic. But strictly speaking, contradiction itself is not allowed by logic. So AI has this issue. Until something more sophisticated than AI comes along, it'll never have consciousness. It may be able to give the impression that it's conscious, and my God, it does do that. But it can't think for itself because it doesn't have a self. It doesn't have a self because it can't suspend the law of non-contradiction. You know, a digital system, it's either switches either on or off. But in our heads, we're capable of having that switch on and off at the same time. You could sort of bracket it. I suppose you could do it with some kind of coding, I don't know. But the nature of those brackets is very peculiar. In the same way, the difference in the status of brackets between those funny square ones you get on the computer keyboard and these ones. They are different. And so, in the world of AI, the business about suspension of law of contradiction is something which is they need to get their minds around if they're intent on making it very dangerous. It's going to happen. So there's no point in me suggesting otherwise. And then it could possibly have consciousness, but it wouldn't be AI anymore, because intelligence is not consciousness. Intelligence is a process. It's a gift. You can be highly intelligent or not so intelligent. It's like a tool. It's not consciousness itself. Conflating intelligence with consciousness is as daft as conflating influence with power, or equally, in some crazy way, conflating knowledge with power. It's a bit balmy when you think about it. Lack of precision in speech is part of the problem. And going back to sociology, my last podcast, they will be sloppy beyond belief about power, influence, and so on and so forth. And that's aside from the fact they don't really grasp the non-logic and the nature of incoherent and inconsistent entities in the intersubjective. They have no idea. So sociology could be a fantastic subject, and it ought to be. But currently fixated with the likes of Durkheim and God knows what else, and quasi-Marxist approaches, and trying to be, in apostrophes, scientific, physics heavy and all that, is doomed to fail. And because it doesn't recognise the nature of humanity, that is, we are capable of suspending the law of non-contradiction, because sociology doesn't even do that. Essentially, its study is doomed to create inhuman judgments about the way we are and the way of society. It's appalling in a way, but it can be dealt with. They just have to grasp, and I believe this, if they just grasp the three paradoxes of reason, nothing else, things will fall into line. But again, just like the knowledge is power stuff, the blinkers are there. There's also a huge amount of vested interest. It's very hard to admit that you may have built a career on some kind of sociological apparent insight. To see the whole thing go down in flames is something that, understandably, most people fight tooth and nail to avoid. They prefer the world be ignorant, and they have a nice, their status remains intact, because that's more important than humanity itself in many cases. This is gross. But if you look at the way the universities in Germany degraded from the mid-1920s up to the end of 1945, even onwards, Germany used to be the intellectual capital of the world. My father, his degree in biology in the 1930s, had to learn German, at least a fair amount, to be qualified to get his degree. It's just a first degree, it's not PhD or anything. That's how significant Germany was then. And we forget the likes of Heidelberg, all these great universities became little more than second or third rate. Oxford and Cambridge are on the brink now, because they too are being ideologically degraded. It is gross, and is really rooted in ignorance. Among other things, if you understand the paradoxes of reason, ideology collapses. Ideology can't handle that. If you understand that we can suspend the law of non-contradiction in a temporary basis, which is essential to be able to reason, because reasoning is a process. There's a bit before and after. When you finish your reasoning, you go back and you hope to have a sort of logically consistent result. That's what you want to do. It's like trying to re-establish or establish consistency related to the subject matter you're talking about. So there it is. Knowledge is not power. The two words are not interchangeable. They mean different things. And it's a combination of meanings, in a way, of knowledge and authority, and it metamorphoses into power. This gives you some sort of freedom. It's freedom of thought, because the metamorphic result of a combination of two ideas is not the sum of those two ideas, despite the result being the product of those two ideas. That's a very important distinction. There you go. I finished. Thank you for listening. I'm sorry for those who had a pretty good idea of what I was banging on about before, because I mentioned these subjects time and time again, but I thought it was about time focused just on this particular form of mental blinker. Oh well, I'll go on another subject next time. I found this quite interesting. When you talk freestyle, sometimes new ideas pop up as you're going along, in amongst the ums and ers. Strange things tend to come out of the woodwork, even inside my own head, as ideas sort of confront each other. They come from my unconscious, and they come into my conscious thought. They sort of join together in peculiar ways, and you discover things like that. In the same way that serendipity can lead to great discoveries. In the case, for instance, of Fleming and penicillin, there's that cat again. Fantastic discovery, purely by chance. He saw in a petri dish coming back from the holidays some mould, and he wondered why, and why was it behaving that way. And he put things together, and he discovered the utility of penicillin, which is not the sum of the parts that make it up. Much more. It's a magic. The utility is a form of freedom. Invention is a form of freedom, which is a combination of utilities which create something with a very different utility. The constituents of, gunpowder. You look at their properties and just say, add those properties up. So logically you would think the new result of that mixture would just be a bunch of properties. So black powder, some white specks in it because something else you put in and so on. But it isn't, because the utility or the effect of a result is a massive explosive, whereas before it was fairly innate stuff. So that's, again, a combination of thoughts of that same significance. I'm going to leave it here. The cat's giving me a lot of bother. He's 21 years old and he needs attention. I'll just bring him over and show you. Hang on a minute. Come on, cat. Come on. Look at the camera. They never look at the camera, do they? Oh, no. There we are. There we go, little one. Let's have a look down here. Oh, you're doing your escape job. I'm very fond of this brute. But when you get to this age, they start getting a bit hard to manage and demanding. You're yowling, aren't you? Goodbye from me and the cat.